Isabel Wilkerson, it's so nice to have this opportunity to talk to you. Your new book is called Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. You use the word caste. You could call it racism in America, but you don't. Why did you call it caste?
When you don't know the country's history, our country's history, then it seems like a completely alien language, an alien term. But then when you know our country's history, when you really know the history of enslavement, the history of Jim Crow, the true history of Jim Crow, then it starts to click into place. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The idea of caste allows us to look past the somewhat emotional, freighted language that we're accustomed to that kind of gets us mired in emotions of guilt and shame and blame and allows us to sort of see things differently.
That's such a great point, right? Because for something to be racist, someone has to be acting in a racist way upon it. And so I think that's right. It brings up a lot of guilt in a way that caste seems to just invite a sense of examining the issue versus feeling like you're part of the system. We just love to have this vision of America that doesn't match the actual history of America. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a combination of things, but one of them is just, to me, the failure of our education system to truly be able to impart the reality of our country's history. 41 of the 50 states at some point in our country's history had laws against people marrying across racial lines. Alabama was one of the last states to finally renounce, to vote against its anti-miscegenation laws. And it didn't happen until the year 2000 that they finally passed a law, essentially concurring with what the Supreme Court had already ruled. And 40% of Alabama voters voted to keep the anti-miscegenation laws on the books in 2000.
Listen, my parents got married in 1958. My dad was white, my mom was black, right? And literally, they lived in Baltimore, Maryland, so they could not get married. They had to leave, go to DC to get hitched, come back, live illegally. They had 6 kids. My little brother was born the same year the Supreme Court would overturn the ban on interracial marriage. And people think of these things as like, oh my God, ancient history. You're like, I'm not so ancient.
We often think about this as being ancient history, something that's going so far back that has nothing to do with anybody alive today. No adult will be alive at the point at which African Americans will have been free for as long as they were enslaved. That won't happen until the year 2111. It's the structure of human division. It's the architecture of our hierarchy. It's what we've inherited.
What other signals are there, do you think, that relate to where you fall in the caste system in this country?
Well, gender is a huge one. Patriarchy is real. Immigrant status is yet another. These things have meaning. I mean, these things determine one's standing, one's, sense of, the respect that is accorded a person, the assumptions about, intelligence and resourcefulness and beauty even. Of course, the more extreme examples that we've seen are, people who are born to what I would call the subjugated group, historically subjugated group, who are going about their days, and then someone from what I would call the dominant group, asserts him or herself and intrudes upon that moment. The 2 men who were at a Starbucks, waiting for a friend, or the bird watcher, the black bird watcher in Central Park. Racism exists, but there's something underneath it that seems to persist no matter what laws we pass. It seems to be autonomic. Like, people seem to know who can say what and way to an individual.
Can you buy your way out of the caste system? If you are black and wealthy, can you to some degree inoculate yourself against the effects of systemic racism?
I think you can buy a buffer against some of it. I think you can buy comfort for sure. You can buy distance. I would say that, when you think about someone who was, say, the editor of British Vogue, Edward Enninful, who is one of the, clearly one of the most sophisticated people on the planet, and yet when he was walking into his own office building, the security guard stopped him and told him he needed to use a freight elevator. So what I say is that if you can act your way out of it, then it's class. If you cannot act your way out of it, it's caste.
You have talked about Germany and the eugenicists.
And it wasn't until Charlottesville that, we all saw that the protesters were merging these symbols of these two cultures across, decades across an ocean. They made the connection about the Confederacy in our country and Nazism in Germany. American eugenicists were writing books that were huge bestsellers in Germany and were in fact used by the Nazis in their school curriculum. That's how interdependent these eugenicists were across the oceans.
When you look at some of the data, like a Black person being 5 times as likely to be stopped without just cause compared to a white counterpart, I guess I'd like to know, for the people for whom they do have to think about it all the time, what does it do to people?
Having to deal with the constant vigilance and hypervigilance of just making it through the world every day. It actually shortens the telomeres on the cells, which opens people up to other problems, that opens them up to cancers and other other illnesses that literally can mean the longevity of a person. It actually affects the lifespan of people who have to live with the constant fear.
What does an individual do in a system that seems to sometimes be working against you in order to fight against a system that's been around for such a long time?
Well, ultimately, a system is made up of individual people. We make up the system. The system is us. And that means that there are things that people can do. I make mention of this term radical empathy, which means that it requires each of us to not just try to imagine ourselves in someone else's shoes, but to be willing to do the work to truly understand another person's experience so that we can begin to understand not what we would do in a situation we've never been in and likely never will be, but what it is for that person so that we can begin to see our common humanity. We do have more power than we think we have.
Isabel Wilkerson, so nice to talk to you as always. What a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.